Hey everybody, in this week's episode we're going to be looking at plant teachers, a useful tool or a magic pill. We'll get into it coming up next. Hey, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Wizard Factory video podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper understanding of the universe and ourselves. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
And if you're new here and you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. Really appreciate that. So let's get into it. We're talking about plant teachers, something obviously both of us have some experience with. And there's a lot of different ways we can look at this, and probably a lot of different ideas and opinions that people might have about what they are, what they're used for, what they can do, what they can't do. And that's really what we want to get into pretty thoroughly here in general regarding any kind of psychedelic or entheogenic substances. So we'll start out by just kind of looking at the history of psychedelics, obviously not in entirety, or we would be here for days, but that's kind of the point. The history of psychedelics is the history of mankind. It has been around. Plant teachers, medicines, herbs have been around and being used by human beings pretty much well beyond recorded history. So this is something that we, as every human being is an individual, have a very deep relationship with plants, regardless of the bastardization of life that we are currently living in modern society. So yeah, it's very important to at least have a good understanding of it, whether it's something that interests you in experimenting yourself personally or not. It's very important that people have a very honest and realistic idea about what plant teachers are, because they are so very powerful and important and useful. So yeah, Brian?
Yeah, no, it's definitely well said. Like the evolution of us as a species and us using different plant teachers, or, discovering different plants, that has, many have theorized that's very much been a lot part of accountable for why we've developed a lot of the even spiritual beliefs or practices, or where our brain is as a species. So there's a very long genetic memory with certain plant teachers, and especially, and we'll get into this point later, plant teachers from different areas, how they kind of carry a different charge. Like each one kind of has their own unique charge or consciousness to it. So yeah, we're definitely going to get into all this and look at it from a balanced perspective of, we're not coming at it from the perspective of these are a total magic pill that's going to fix everything, or everybody just needs to try this and all of a sudden the world would be better. I think that's a very, very kind of immature perspective to think that, everybody could just take something and all of a sudden everything is fixed. That's not how these work, but they are very useful tools, and again, we're speaking from our experience on this as well. In my experience, they're a very useful tool for me for cracking open the shell and letting me look at things that they were just hard to look at first, but once I had that kind of shell cracked open, I could then take those lessons and apply them, which is, the key to all this.
Right, and that's kind of the first perspective that we wanted to open up with, is in context to why we personally have experimented and experienced these things for ourselves as a medicinal practice for healing versus escapism, or just something that is fun or entertaining, or that sort, recreationally, I guess you could say, very intentionally being used for medicine. And there's a quote that I'm very fond of. I don't know what the original source is, but your your wounding wasn't your fault, but healing is your responsibility. When you get a cold, you don't expect the person that gave it to you to make you better. It sucks that happened, but at the end of the day, you're the one that has to take the vitamin C and get plenty of sleep and drink fluids so that you'll recover from that. Well, emotional disease is no different than that. And this is something that, again, is a useful tool. It's not something that's just gonna fix everything as soon as you take it. You still have to do the work, and that's very, very important.
And in my experience, I feel kind of lucky in the sense that I've always, when I first had experiences with psychedelics of any kind, is at a time in my life where I was very much going through a major transformation. I had just got out of the Marine Corps, so like my whole worldview was utterly shattered, and I had no idea like who I was or what I was going to do. And that was when I kind of first started discovering plant teachers. But I never took them just for fun. I always kind of had a natural respect or an intuition that I should only take them if I have a question that I need answered, or if there was something, if I've been thinking on like a certain subject for a long time, but I'm having trouble like really getting clarity on it, or getting it like concise, to where I can summarize it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would kind of take that as a cue where I'd feel a calling, where I would start thinking about, like I would almost hear like I would just start thinking about like, well, maybe consider doing a trip soon. But then I'd always just wait till it felt right. And then anytime I've taken it with that an intention and in that kind of setting, I've always come out with the answer, I wanted, and then some, usually. So, I think it's really important as a foundation to understand why you're taking them and the intention behind it. There's a huge difference between using these tools in a ritualistic setting or for the purpose of healing versus just kind of taking them to, party or go see a million different fish shows, or, and never actually do any healing work with it. So, they're like any tool, it's how you're using it. You could use it for its proper intended use, or you could, misuse it and really hurt yourself doing so.
Right. And I think the word respect is really jumping out at me at this time, because when you were just talking about how you've always had sort of that innate respect for them, and only you kind of just intuitively knew that you should only use them under those circumstances. And for me, it was kind of the reverse, where I had a very basic and ignorant perspective going in. I just had like a curiosity about them, and I wanted to kind of overcome the fear of what might happen just so I can experience for myself. But I didn't have that innate respect to begin with. But where does respect really come from is power. You can't respect that which is disempowered. It just doesn't work that way. And likewise, if I didn't respect guns, but I went waving them around, well, they're dangerous just the same. And if something bad were to happen, you best believe I would probably respect the gun a lot more after that. Well, in the same way, that respect was learned through not respecting it in that apophatic process. Mm-hmm. I came to understand that, oh, wait a minute, these are very powerful tools and they should be wielded with great care and intention. And that was kind of more cultivated for me.
That's the beautiful thing about the universe is like, there's so many different ways to learn through it. And sometimes that apophatic learning process that we've talked about a lot on the show, that Saturnian energy, that's a really useful way to learn. So the lesson sticks with you when you learn that way. So it's interesting that we both kind of came at them from a slightly different perspective, but ultimately end up with really the same kind of worldview on how we view them and how they should be used.
That's how truth operates. It will take you on your own personal and subjective journey to arrive to the same place, because it is what it is. But you are also what you are, who isn't necessarily who the next person is. So you're going to have your own way of getting there.
Hmm.
And so like moving forward to clarify here a little bit about what specific type of substances we're talking about too. We say plant teachers, some people may not even really be familiar with that term, or you know what we're referring to. So you know, this is specifically anything that is occurring naturally, that you can find in nature, that doesn't need to be made in a lab. So psilocybin mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, and you know, cannabis, obviously a little bit different, not as psychedelic in terms of like tripping, but still highly potent medicinal and healing plant. And then you're probably thinking, well, what about LSD, and why are we? I'm certainly not saying that you shouldn't partake of synthetic psychedelics. I was personally never drawn to them. Brian, you said that you've had some really good experiences with them.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of different natural occurring plant teachers. The ones we listed are just kind of probably the most common that people here in the West be familiar with. But everywhere you go in the world, there are plant teachers there that are local to that area, and those are very useful. And in my experience, because I've definitely tried both, L and as well as mushrooms and other naturally occurring ones. And the naturally occurring substances just they have a different feel to them. Like as I mentioned earlier, every kind of psychedelic has its own form of consciousness to it. And and I do think they're all useful, but we really wanted to focus on the naturally occurring ones, specifically for the reason one, that's they're going to have a lot more of an epigenetic memory to them, and we'll get into that a little bit later, because being naturally occurring, there's something that indigenous tribes in that area would have been using for various periods of time, but usually even thousands of years. Sometimes a lot of these substances have a very long history with people, and are very central to a lot of cultures. You can see it, and it plays out in many different ways, whether it's through art or how the different social interactions or rituals within the tribe, things like that. They're definitely very intricate to a lot of parts of life. But with the synthetics, that's a whole other kind of realm to dive into as well, because there's constantly new things being engineered and coming out, and a lot of people will handle them a little bit differently. So we definitely wanted to focus more on the kind of naturally occurring substances. Let's say cannabis is kind of a good one to start with, just because that's where a lot of people will start with their diving into plant teachers. Like I know for me personally, I'd never used any kind of drug other than like just drinking alcohol, like until after I was actually on my way out of the Marine Corps, and that's when I first encountered cannabis, and for me, it had a very healing effect. It definitely, in its own way, cracked the shell, especially in regards to like helping me like learn how to laugh. Again, that was something. I was such a serious person. Like I'd never smiled. In fact, if I saw like other people expressing emotions, I would get enraged, like seeing it. Like I had a lot of trauma. So it was a very useful step for me, going through and using that to kind of start to crack that shell a little bit, and prepare me for for other ones later down the road, like psilocybin mushrooms. And even with cannabis, there's been things I learned even just from cultivating it or growing. Like the first time I ever grew a little plant, I just I had like so much fun just watching it grow all the time. And and one day it kind of like dawned on me that was possible, being able to create life and like help facilitate beautiful things in the world. And I wasn't just there for destruction, which like really most of my childhood, or wanting to go into the Marine infantry, destruction was really like the theme that I thought my life was all about. I thought that was the only thing I was really capable of. So even if it wasn't taking the plant, like just even the cultivating experience, like that kind of consciousness associated with that plant, like there was a lot of really beautiful lessons I've got with cannabis specifically. That being said, again, I don't think it's a total fix everything, or it's a tool like any other. And I think it's still very possible for people to get so stuck into the habit of it that it becomes something that they're using for escapism rather
Mhm.
than self-discovery. And that does, that what a lot of people won't like to admit that with cannabis, 'cause, but
It can
but
very
they're
easily become a crutch.
right, exactly. And that can happen with anything, but that's,
Mhm.
that's definitely something that should be acknowledged with it as well. So it's
Mhm.
not, you shouldn't just be stoned out of your mind all the time, for years. I know I've done that before, and
Mhm.
as I've gotten older, dialing back or not using it as much, or taking periods of breaks, like I find that to be very useful. It's not good to overuse anything at all.
Mhm.
For a period of time. Again, these are tools that are helpful that should be used with balance, and with
Mhm.
a specific intention in mind.
Right. And as you were saying, Brian, there's a lot of importance of the connection of a person and their own like bloodlines and their personal epigenetic connection to different plants, and how uh, you can still have a lot of profound experiences on other things that aren't aligned or associated with your culture, but you're you have the ability to tap into that charge, which is very powerful. And so that's kind
Mhm.
of that's what we're the middle ground that we're coming at this with is, you should at least be mindful to try to work with the plants that are from your indigenous region, wherever your bloodlines descend out of.
Or it's at least a good place to start, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And as you were saying, like you tried cannabis first, I certainly had. It seemed a much bigger jump in my mind from cannabis to like something that would give me a full-on trip. So I was smoking well before I ever dared to try an actual psychedelic. But then, ironically, the first one that I ever tried is one of the most powerful ones. I smoked DMT, and yeah, it definitely gave me the full-blown experience. And beyond that point, I couldn't deny that there was uh, a lot of value to be gleaned from that experience.
mhm.
So let's look at really what can plant teachers do versus what they can't do. I feel that mainly they act as a doorway to your own consciousness, that it sort of helps peel back the veil of reality and allows you to see more of what's possible, more of what's happening on an energetic level. And so visually, audibly, like all the different aspects for me and what I've experienced with all the different types of substances that we mentioned, that was sort of the biggest aspect to it, was that you're being shown the magic of the mundane. I guess that's a really good way to put that. The magic of the mundane, in that there is such celestial beauty and such a deep organization of things, and you can see the fractalization of patterns and spirals and colors and wisps of energy and stuff like that, that even if you're hallucinating it, it's giving you that experience that's going to open your mind to what is possible.
Mhm. Well, I know for me, it's very interesting. Many times, like I said, if people are just taking them for like kind of the wrong reasons and they're just partying, they're wanting to see like visuals and things, but they're not actually understanding. A lot of times, those visuals, those very much have lessons contained within them, and a lot of times they can take years to break down. Uh, for me, like my very first mushroom trip I ever took, that was the first psychedelic I had experimented with. And, I learned a really beautiful lesson. And it was that, everything's the same, just in a different way. That was some, I've talked about it on the show before, and it's something that's become a foundational like principle to my life,
Mm-hmm.
over a decade later. But I learned that from, I was looking up at the stars, and I had like some, just a couple close friends around, and like, just looking around at everything, and I could see kind of this web or this grid that was connecting everything together. That there were lines in between, and that like they would go in between like each being or each object, and like just everything was connected in like kind of this web or this grid of consciousness.
Mhm.
And when I was looking at that, I was just fascinated by it, and then that's when that like lesson hit me, and it was very simple, like just short and simple. Everything's the same, just in a different way. Like, but that simplicity could just be, I could extrapolate, so much out of that, and it's taken me like years to really learn it and apply it, and integrate it into my life. But it absolutely was a very kind of life changing moment for me. It was I remember it hit me so hard at the time that I just kept repeating it. Like every time I would say it, it would just open up a new layer of it. So, and that's the point I'm getting to with this, is that when you're using these as a proper tool, when you find that answer, you have to apply the answer. Like, that's the key. You have to be able to take that out of that experience and then apply it to your life to where it actually changes your life. That's when it's really useful, and that's what these are supposed to be used for. It's not about the experience itself or the trip itself. It's about the tools and the things that you can discover within that you can take away from that and apply to your life in a practical way.
Yeah, it's almost like you're getting a little field trip into the astral realm, and you can't stay there, but you can bring little tools back with you. And that's how I view it, and then that's why I like to journal when I do a very intentional trip, usually towards the end, because at first I want to just really like submit to the experience and really feel it. But then at some point I'm just getting bombarded with downloads, and I'm like, this stuff is so good. Like, I want to, save some of it, document it, and reread it later. So that's been really useful too. And let's see. I've experimented mostly with probably DMT more than anything, which is a very short trip, normally around 10 to 12 minutes. Second to that would be mushrooms, which I've done probably a dozen times. And then I did ayahuasca twice consecutive nights in Mexico a couple of years back. And so I can honestly say there's a lot of parallels between the experiences, but then there's a lot of very different aspects to them that are very unique to that one teacher. And the person that was facilitating the ayahuasca ceremony is a shaman in training. She won't call herself a shaman. And she had some other shamans there, and they all teach the traditional, the shamanic philosophy of the people of Peru. And it's all about connecting with the consciousness of that plant. And they speak of Mother Ayahuasca in the feminine is an energetic archetype. It is a very feminine, but very powerful and fierce, and sometimes harsh as well. But I was given a very loving, gentle ride my first two. I actually didn't even purge at all, but it was very peaceful, and I did have difficult times where I was crying or feeling a lot of fear, but I navigated them very, very smoothly. And the biggest theme about that one was honestly my own recognition of my own power, just how much power and potential and sovereignty and goodness that I am, despite all the other bad programming that's conflicting with that, and just being shown how much I shoot myself in the foot and hold my own self back from being all that I can be, or even giving the love or receiving the love that I want. There's just so many things to it. It acts as a mirror to yourself that you have to be willing to look honestly at and do something with that.
Well, and I like that you said that what you're really afraid of was your own power, because that's something I think, especially like in general, like that's what people really are afraid of, is themselves, and like just how powerful they are. It's not just the shadow aspects or the parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at or that we need to work on. A lot of times it's actually just how powerful we really are that we're afraid of. And I think that's one of the things with plant teachers, is they ultimately will all just show us ourselves, and just kind of through different perspectives or different lenses would be a way to look at it. And that's useful. And I like that you mentioned the shamans, that they specifically are working with that plant, like with that consciousness. They understand that it has like its own individual sense, that you're stepping into its realm. It's not, you don't stay there all the time. It's a useful tool. And that, again, that reminds me of, with all indigenous cultures, they all kind of have their own, entheogenic substances that they work with, depending on like what is growing in their, their geographical area. And those will have a very strong connection with the people. And even I think, if that connection has been broken for a while, it can be reestablished. It's something that's always there because it's within that epigenetic memory. So I think there is something to be said of experimenting and working with plant teachers that are cultivated or grown, or from the area that, your genetic heritage is from. But there's also, you can also still step outside of that and work with plant teachers from other cultures. But even when you do that, like I do notice with different plant teachers, for example, like with like peyote or something, the different patterns and things you see will actually kind of shift. Like they'll like where they may have kind of a more, what we would describe as like a Native American, like a Southwest Native American or something, kind of patterns and things that you would see with that. Whereas if you're using, a different substance, the patterns may appear completely different. But what's interesting is those patterns that you see very much are associated with what we would associate the art of that culture with. So then you can kind of see that connection is like, it's
a very huge impact that it has on that culture that they're creating based on what they're being shown on, during those heightened states of being.
Right. And I think that's just a very interesting thing to look at. So, I think it's not that people should only work with, plants that are from their, culture. But I also I think it should be something cautious that if you're working with a plant outside of your culture, that it just might be a factor to think about, that there might not be as much like an epigenetic memory or a tie with it, or it might not be as familiar, or things like that. And not that would be a bad thing at all, but it's just it is interesting to experience the feel of different ones. And I think it's a balance, definitely, there's value in both.
Right. So the next thing, as far as what they can do, we've looked at how they can act as a doorway to consciousness that shows you what's possible, so that even when you come back, you still have this new idea of kind of the metaphysical realm. But then also looking at it from a specifically medicinal perspective, that it's able to crack your shell, but you still have to figure out how to deal with it. Like the shell is just the outside. You can get past that, but you still have to dig out the fruit from the inside and get there. So I'm gonna tell a story about an experience that I had with mushrooms, probably the most profound experience I had on mushrooms, one of them, at least from a healing perspective specifically. I was feeling this feeling of discomfort and fear and all kinds of not pleasant feelings coming up and building up within me. And then at some point, it's like the dam broke, and I just unleashed uncontrollable emotion in the form of weeping. And it was like so strong coming out of me that I could hear my own voice, and I felt pity for myself. Like my consciousness heard myself crying and was just like, oh, you poor thing, like that. It was so pitiful. And but then it would oscillate into laughter, like Joker style, hilarious, flopping around, holding my ribs, laughing. And it was like this, just like popping out anywhere, path of least resistance to unexpressed emotions. And that sort of really made me realize how much not only do we suppress sadness and negative emotions, but also joy and laughter and things like that. Because I mean, think about how many times you're told to stop laughing in church, or be serious or grow up or whatever like that. That is greatly suppressed in us too. And after that, I couldn't deny any longer what a potent medicine this was, because of that experience and how much I felt liberated afterwards. It was like I just popped this massive zit, and like all this pressure was lifted off of me.
Mhm.
And I've had similar ones like that too. That was the most intense by far, but that emotional purging is what I would call that, which is ironic that, on ayahuasca, you purge physically, but then there's a bit of law of correspondence going on, that the substances tend to just be something that makes you kind of retch out all of the stagnant, trapped goop, whether, emotional, energetic, or physical in your body.
Mhm. Yeah, they're really, they just stir up the energy. They get that emotion is energy and motion, so they get those flowing, and that's really useful. I know definitely another really powerful lesson I learned on an experience I had was just letting go. Like
Mm-hmm.
I realized like just how much I like was hold, and this is kind of similar to what you're saying, just like how much we hold on to everything. And it was kind of this voice that I could hear. It was me talking to myself, but it's just that kind of that higher self telling me like, let go, like it's okay, just let go. And there is a place that it's really beautiful, like stepping into that place of surrender
Mm-hmm.
and vulnerability with yourself. That it's a very relieving. Like you were saying, like it's all this pressure that is just
Mm-hmm.
relief, because you realize like how much you've actually, like how much mental and emotional energy you've put into creating the worldview and the reality that you spend most of your time in, and how much we, how hard we work to actually self-sabotage ourselves, when it would be a lot easier to just trust. That was definitely a big kind of theme I've brought out of these experiences.
Yeah, I mean, a simple way I could sum up what you just said of what I've been repeatedly slapped in the face with when going on these journeys is, you are the source of your own insanity and madness. Like 90% of the shit that you suffer from in your life, you're doing to yourself. Stop it. You're insane. Like just being shown the insanity of humans as well too, because there is a very deep sense of connectedness, and for me, a very deep empathy for humanity and myself all at the same time. It's like I'm weeping for us, one and the same. You know what I mean? In the unnecessary suffering that we are creating in our world due to ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
It's painful, but
Yeah.
it's a beautiful pain, because I would never want to lose that care. That is such a precious gift, and it makes me feel alive when I'm able to actually, you know, feel sad for injustices and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's, I think that's one of the reasons why these substances very much are suppressed in the ways they
Mm.
are, is because they are such powerful keys and gateways to consciousness. And a theme that is very common you see with them, we both expressed it in our own experiences, is that interconnectedness. Like you can learn about uh, the laws of correspondence and the principle of mentalism. You don't have to go and read
Hmm.
the Kybalion or any other like
Right.
esoteric books. You can discover that through your own experience, which
Well, how did
is
they?
how I came to discover those. And then later on, I
Right.
found the literature that confirmed for me, and they're just saying the same things, just in a different way. So
Well, yeah. Anything that came from a book either came from another book, or it came from reality itself. And if it came from
right.
another book, somebody somewhere along the way extrapolated that from an experience. It wasn't just this theory that just, has always existed since the beginning of time. People discover things and then they think, I'll pass this on, because that's part of the beauty of being able to both experience things for yourself but learn from others, is that if we spent our whole lives trying to figure everything out for ourselves, we would never be able to get anything done, because why do that when there's already been, thousands of people that have already done it and written books about it, and you can just stand on their shoulders. That way you can be at the cutting edge of the experience instead of just doing what's already been done.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, that's what both of those forms of learning and experience are useful. Like for me, it's always been so useful to be able to have that direct, knowledge and gnosis of, oh, I've experienced this, and then to find that confirmation, in the reality field through some other form of information as well. Because and that's how you can really measure truth. It's not only coming from your own internal experience, but it's being reflected back to you, and you're getting the same story both ways.
Yeah, I would challenge anyone to answer the question: if something is not truthful, then what good is it? Unless you're lying to someone to literally protect your life or your family or something like that. Outside of that, there is no value in information that is false. It's only going to lead you to more suffering if you're acting upon it. Like we talked in the last episode on co-creating reality, if I tried to build a house with two different sized rulers, the whole thing would be all lopsided and crazy because it's built on a false assumption.
Yeah. So, I'd like to get into and kind of address the concept of a bad trip. That's something we hear a lot of people, if they're not experienced, they're afraid of encountering something like that. And it's not, to me, and this is just my experience, I won't ever really say there's anything that I would call a bad trip. I would say there's difficult or challenging trips that can happen.
It's like the runes. There's no bad runes. There's just challenging ones.
Right. Yeah. That's a great comparison. But that being said, I think if people do have a, for lack of a better term, a bad trip, or a trip that they find very, very difficult or unpleasant, or it was something that was kind of like more traumatic than healing, there's some variables or factors that we can look at of why that is. The first one would obviously be looking at like dosage and what substance they're actually using. Like I said, all these different substances, they all have their own form of consciousness, and some things will work better in different situations. So those are both, what you're taking and how much of it you're taking is obviously a variable. If a person's, young and they don't have any like really world experience, or this is their first time doing something, and their friends are kind of, they're doing it with the wrong intention, like they're showing power, and then people give them way too much. Those are the situations where they don't know how to handle themselves, especially like here in the West, where people are taking them in more of a recreational kind of setting rather than a spiritual or ritualistic setting. There's not that guideline there, so that it's kind of just open to that chaos. So of course, those kinds of settings can create more of that potential chaos.
Or they're just going into it thinking it's going to be a magic pill and like, oh, I don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to take it and I'll be fixed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a lack of respect for it. So, and then obviously the second big factor would be setting, like making sure you're in the correct place. And especially with like certain people, like if they're very shy people in general, or they're not used to opening up or something, them going into like a party situation, that's not going to be the place for them. Like them being out in nature with their own self, or some trusted people would be a lot better kind of setting.
For me, I'd say the people around me is almost more of a factor than the actual place, because you can be in a super nice like cave with art and trees and everything, but if there's somebody, especially people that are really negative or just talking out their ass, like people that are just total, morons that say things without thinking, and they're just like talking shit all the time and stuff. Like, I do not want that around me in general, but especially in these states, because your shield is lowered. You're way more wide open to external energies and things like that. I mean, that's what it's doing, is it's turning up the sensitivity. It's like if I put on night vision goggles and then put a fucking spotlight in my face. Well, why would I do that? I just turned up the sensitivity and then blast it with overload.
Yeah, so setting, obviously is very, very important. And then with that comes the intention / expectation, which we talked about this before. Like, are you taking this as a tool or to achieve a specific thing or to work on a specific issue? And what is your expectation? Like, are you expecting to find the answer, or are you taking this expecting to just, see some cool shit or have an experience, or, that kind of not really respecting the teacher perspective. So that intention and expectation plays an extremely important role. And then as well, another major variable would be mental history. Not everybody should take psychedelics. Like, not like they're not meant for everybody. Like, I actually know, like, people like, for example, even one of my younger brothers, he just can't handle them. They're not, he just,
they don't agree with him.
They do not agree with him. Like, he's never had a good experience on them. He's always ended up actually kind of like, slipping into where, he then had some serious mental health issues that it took him a long time to get through after that. So they are definitely something that should be done with respect. And if you're a person that you do have a lot, like you've experienced a lot of trauma, or you have a lot of repressed emotion or things like that, these could be very, very useful for you. But at the same time, they could also show you, like, it can be a very difficult and challenging experience. Like, so understand that, oh, I have this kind of trauma that I'm trying to work through. So I'm taking this stimulant, this substance, to stimulate certain emotions in order to work through them. If you're coming at it from that perspective, you're prepared. You have that expectation of, oh, when difficult things come up, that's what I'm seeking, so I want to work through them. You're going to be prepared for that, and then that's going to be a useful experience. If you're coming at it from the perspective of you don't know what the fuck you're doing, and all of a sudden when you get slammed with things like that, you're not prepared for it. Like, and it's a lot more difficult to process. So, like as with any kind of act or any kind of magical act, being very clear on, like, what you're doing and why you're doing it is going to, like, lay a proper foundation in order to get the most from that experience.
Right. I mean, if you're someone with a lot of trauma, then it makes sense that you're seeking something that will help you. And certainly that could be with plant teachers, and it's helped us a lot. But especially if that's the case, be very mindful as you're going into it. Start with a very small dosage. Start in a situation where there's very few people around, and those people you do trust a lot, and it's very peaceful, and you can control the music or the lighting, or you can move around if you need to. These things are very important when getting yourself ready for these type of things. So just don't go into it afraid, but do your due diligence and prepare and put some thought into it before you go diving into something like this. And then with that said, also, one of the things that I've actually learned in this process is, as I mentioned earlier, the process of learning that I should respect the teachers and really use them with intention is, when you seek these things out and you take them into your body, you are taking an action that is a nonverbal way of asking the universe a question. You're asking without asking. And so when you do that, you are also agreeing to get an answer. And so you better be ready to accept whatever that answer is that is given to you. And so most of the time, unless you're one of the people that it just, it's not meant for you, and there's other ways you can heal. It's not like this is the only way. Most of the time in those cases, it's you that's fighting the answer that's being given to you. And that's why you're having a bad trip, because you're being shown something you don't want to see. And then it's causing a lot of inner turmoil. So with that said, we also wanted to touch upon the looking at a shamanic guide or a facilitator versus doing it on your own or just with some trusted friends that necessarily aren't trained for that sort of thing. And really, I think there's a lot of value in both. And I've mostly done tripping on my own, but then when I went to Mexico and I did that, that was a very intentional ceremony. And I felt very safe that even if something bad were to happen, that those people would know what to do and be able to help me get back where I need to be. So, you know, that's kind of on you to consider. Do you want to start there until you feel more confident, or, is that a risk that you're just willing to take? Because, we'll be the first to tell you there is always risk, especially with things like this. So, we're not telling you what to do. We're not encouraging anything with this. The purpose of this is to share some information so that hopefully people can make more informed decisions and have a more truthful and realistic idea about what these are and what they can do.
Right. No, I think it's very good to look at the difference between those different settings. I think for the vast majority of people, having especially if it's like their first experience, having a shaman or experienced facilitator there is very useful. It's definitely a way to go. If you look in indigenous cultures like that, that is how it's done. That being said, the apophatic learning process, it can be, although difficult, it can be a very useful one. So going at it on your own, it's definitely not for everybody by any means. There's a small,
you'll get it a lot quicker that way.
But for people who have a calling to kind of into a type of a healing work themselves, or a kind of a shamanic calling, like naturally, I find those people will tend to naturally kind of go through their own initiation. And many times, especially in the West now, that's done on their own because we don't have that culture built up to back up on that. We've lost our shamans and our teachers, like, because monotheism, did everything they can, including slaughtering them, and burning them alive to get rid of that knowledge. So
right. And that's really important to note, honestly, the fact that just try to imagine, if you can, that there was a time where every single culture, there was a shaman that was just standard. And most of the time, those shamans were also psychedelic facilitators. And again, the same thing rings true with them. It was a tool in their arsenal. Right. Nowadays, there's a lot of ideas people have about what a shaman is, with all these, Coachella shamans, and, anybody who reads a Terrence McKenna book thinks they're a shaman and all this. I mean, it's nonsense. But that, it's not all about psychedelics and plant teachers, but that was a very standard tool in their arsenal for helping the tribe stay on track and heal their stuff and maintain cohesion and prosperity.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely a very useful tool.
And then they were systematically annihilated. That in and of itself should tell you something. Oh, we can't be having that. Put them all to the sword. Yeah,
monotheism definitely very much, actually passed like various laws, including into the drug war today, is rooted in monotheism and, a lot of those Christian ideals. And that's a way of being able to control people's consciousness and keep them stuck in a box, like where these things, they blast you out of the box, so they don't want that. But, again, as I was saying, though, so a lot of people who have a modern calling to being a healer, to working with plant teachers, it's just a natural, like an intuitive thing, because, certain things are being awoken in them. A lot of times they will do a lot of soul. Like, I know, like for me, I the vast majority of my experiences, like I didn't even, like, even when there were people around, like they weren't even taking, I was like literally just by myself, like figuring it out all on my own. But I just like tend to be a type of personality that I like really like challenges. Like I tend to go at things like the hard way, and that's not the way that everybody should do it necessarily. So, but it's a valuable learning process, on its own. So, again, with being able to understand like where we're coming at this, it's getting out of the black and white perspectives with it and being able to see the nuance. It's not either or, it's both. And we see that a lot, we talk about that a lot on the channel, being able to start to see the nuance and getting out of the monotheistic mindset of having to see just this black and white worldview on every single subject, and being able to see things as both, and see how intricate and how beautiful, and they all work together, all these different perspectives, and they all have their own place and their own value, and should all be considered.
Right. Yeah. So that's pretty much what we wanted to come here to say. We just wanted to shed some light on the subject, something that we feel is a good thing to think about sometimes. And again, this is not medical advice. This is not mental health advice or anything of the sort. It's just information that hopefully was entertainment as well, and just something food for thought. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We're going to wrap this up for the week. But a couple of announcements before we go. For those of you unaware, we are now on all the major podcast platforms, so go check us out on there if you've been wanting to listen to us on that drive to work, or cutting your vegetables for dinner or whatever like that, and you can't watch the show. You can listen to it now. So definitely go follow us there. And for all of our services and products and everything else Wizard Factory related, if you want to learn more about us or help us out, go to thewizardfactory.com. But that's all we have for you for the week. And thanks so much for watching. Again, hit that like button, help us grow. We really appreciate that. And subscribe on your way out. Tell your friends, tell your wife, tell your kids. And thank you so much for watching. So until next week, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.